Next, we have 4.02, the 5-year forecast. I'm going to turn it over to you, Ms. Marshall.
Thank you. So here we are again. Waiting for it to be pulled up. It's May. Yay! So with the end of the school year comes the updated 5-year forecast. So that's what we're going over this time. So the purpose of the forecast is this is a valuable long-range planning tool. We use this in most conversations when we're talking about staffing or future program decisions and all of those things. We always refer to that 5-year forecast. It also serves as our basis for determining our ability to sign what we affectionately call the 412 certificate. So this is Ohio Revised Code 5705.412, which is the our ability to enter into contracts based on available funds that we have available and all of that. So that's the 412 certificate. And then it also provides the Department of Education and Workforce and the Auditor of State an opportunity to identify districts that are headed towards financial difficulties. So that's why we do the forecast. So when we look at the requirements of the forecast, we have to file our initial forecast no later than November 30th in the fall each year. So we're doing this now. We're going to come right back next year in November and have another year added on with a new forecast in the fall. And then we have to update the 5-year projections no later than May 31st, which is what we're doing today. And then we have to, our projections include the current fiscal year, which is fiscal year 25, and then the next 4 fiscal years. So for this one, it's fiscal year through to fiscal year 29. And we also include 3 years of actual information for historical purposes. When we look at a forecast structure, I like to look at it in 3 separate sections. So we have the revenue side, we have the expenditure side, and then we have the changes in fund balance and the fund balance. Just a reminder, our 5-year forecast only includes our general operating fund, doesn't include any other funds, and our fiscal year runs from the July 1st to June 30th date. Challenges that we have for this forecast, and really pretty much every forecast that we do, but specifically this time around, are legislative changes, state funding, and federal funding. That's an ongoing conversation at both of those levels. I do want to point out that what we know today is what's in the forecast. It will definitely change going forward. We'll continue to get new information as we move forward, and we keep a working document constantly. So the big changes for this forecast, if you remember, we were just here in March doing that optional spring update with some of the austerity measures. So as we're updating it for May, we're seeing our expenses for the year coming in under budget. So that's been adjusted for this forecast. We have finalized all of our budgets for the next fiscal year 26. We're also looking at allocating for some future needs through transfers, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. This is just a snapshot of the forecast with the projected revenues. So we overall have seen a slight increase with property taxes, with the real estate property taxes specifically from new construction. And property value. So we do get a little bit from that inside millage, the 3.8 mils that we've talked about. And then any new construction, as long as it's not under some sort of exemption with a tax abatement or TIF or anything like that. Public utility is down overall slightly. And that was some change with the AEP values and refunds. We do expect that to bump back up next year. And then fiscal year 25 state funding was reduced. We lost about $4 million this year in state funding overall. The state also included one-time science of reading stipends. That's not really part of the foundation formula. It's just a pass-through that's going through. And then that transfers, we had the capital projects fund that we created to combine with the bond issue last fall. The bond issue wasn't successful, so we transferred back that $30 million And so that is appearing as a revenue, but it's not really a revenue for the fiscal year, if that makes sense. I just wanted to highlight that. And then also we have a one-time funding for E-rate funding, which this is funding we get from the state for infrastructure improvements that they reimburse us for, that Stifler and team have been working on. So we'll have that reimbursement this year. And so that's just a one-time fluctuation that we wouldn't normally see. Revenue uncertainty. So cuts, we saw cuts, during COVID. Governor DeWine came out and immediately slashed all of our school budgets in May when back in 2020, and those continued into 2021. We got a new funding formula, the Fair School funding formula, in 22 and 23, but it wasn't fully funded or updated. That funding formula continued in 24 and current year 25, still not being fully funded or appropriately updated. And we saw a significant reduction in current year compared to last year. We are looking at new biennium budgets for the upcoming year. That's what we're talking about now for 26 and 27. And then we have another one in the forecast for 28 and 29 that we'll be talking about. Homestead and rollback reimbursements are revenue that we get, and they are continually up for debate with the legislature. I think there's several bills that are in hearings now that would affect ultimately what that revenue would look like for us in the future. For property taxes, the House's current proposal, as it sits today, would claw back anything over 30% of expenses in our cash balance, and that's based on the projections that we had, is about $110 million overall if that were to become law. And there are several bills that are in committee, have had hearings by the current General Assembly, which is 136th, that will affect property taxes in some way, shape, or form. So lots of things we are keeping an eye on, and I'm sure I'll be testifying a lot this year besides just with the state's budget on the various bills that they're considering. And in addition to that, there's many bills that are continue to be outstanding. We always have a running list of about 2 to 3 pages. That's a list of bills that will somehow impact either services we have to provide or will chip away at the revenue potential that we have. So just something to keep in mind of. When we are talking about the volatility of school funding, I want to make sure that everybody sort of has a snapshot. So I shared this with Kelly Stalker's government class at Westerville North High School. They went down South. Oh, sorry, Westerville South High School. Yes, thank you. But her class went down to the State House to visit. Yeah, thanks for going down there with them, Christy. And but this is sort of just a snapshot of the school funding formulas that we've had to try to plan around over the last couple of decades and a half. So from 1990 to 1998, the DeRolf decision, where the Supreme Court, the first time the Supreme Court ruled the school funding model unconstitutional, was in 1997. So after that, we started seeing some forms of budget models that was no longer considered residual budgeting. It was unconstitutional based on the over-reliance on local property taxes and also residual budgeting. So from 99 to 2005, we had the successful school models. Then we had the building block models from 2006 to 2009. 2010 to 2011, we had the evidence-based model. That was Governor Strickland. That wasn't really ever fully implemented because we were going through the Great Recession at the same time. And then when Governor Kasich came in, we sort of went back to the bridge formula and then residual budgeting all throughout that time frame. And then we're continued on residual budgeting through 2019 until COVID, in which case we had frozen and reduced funding during the COVID years. And so the Fair School Funding Plan, the first year of that was 2022. That's what we have now. That's what we're fighting with the legislature to keep moving forward with appropriate updates to the cost inputs in the formula. Switching gears to expenditures, we are anticipating our expenditures to increase with inflation. We've updated everything with our austerity measures. This forecast, which we're going to talk more about, includes a one-time transfer out of $45 million, which is our current estimate for what we will need to plan for the future. When we talk about transfers, I'm going to ask Mrs. Ferris to play a video for us. Maybe. It's a very short video. Can you make it big, Jennifer, before you play it? Oh.
State Rep Thomas says districts can move money from their general funds into specific reserve accounts meant for something like a roof or a school bus.
You either should be allocating it towards some future purpose for the voter, or it shouldn't be.
So that's State Representative Dave Thomas, not the founder of Wendy's. He's up out of the Ashtabula County, and he is a former county auditor, and he has introduced a lot of different bills and things for property taxes, for the property tax conversation. And so he was interviewed by ABC6 here in Columbus, and so the idea, I think, as lawmakers are looking at that clawback or that cash cap, is that districts don't have plans for the funds that they have. That could not be further from the truth. So we are working to make sure that it's very clear the plans that we do have for our cash balances. And so the first thing that we're looking at is there is the terminations benefits fund. So this is, we talked about this at the work session at the end of April. This is essentially allows us to allocate and restrict money for this specific purpose that we know that we're going to have the need for in the future. We have requirements under state law for severance payments and things like that. We're also on an irregular pay cycle. Once every 10 years, we have that 27th payroll. We last had one in 2023. We'll likely have another one in 2033 unless the pay schedule changes. And so we'll be looking at having that conversation to ensure that we can help smooth out some of the outer years of the forecast so that we can plan ahead for those expenses that we know we're going to incur. Do you have anything to add to that, Angie?
I was just going to say, so the idea is these are things we would be spending anyway out of the general fund, and so
Yes.
we would be setting this money aside. It's just really an accounting piece
Right.
at that point, so that that money isn't perceived to be just sitting there for nothing.
Right, and I think that that's the confusion. I think people that are making decisions on what our state laws will look like in the future don't always understand how school funding works, or they probably haven't worked in a school district in the past, or especially in our roles where they have to plan for the resources that we do have and deal with all the different state funding models over the decades and all that. So I think this just helps us make it very clear that we have a plan for what those dollars will be used for. And that's really the recommendation that I'm hearing in some of these hearings about, well,
We've
you
heard
would
it from
have that
multiple
money-
legislators.
You would have that money allocated if you really needed it. So the idea is that we're trying to allocate, make sure that it's very clear what it's allocated for.
Which we already have different planning documents that
Mm.
already have the things we're about to talk about outline,
We do.
but it's just making it from an accounting standpoint a little more solidified.
Yeah, so the capital projects fund, so this is the same thing that we created last year. Obviously, what we did last year was to be combined with the bond issue, so this is not the same thing as that. This is just us taking a look at what those future needs might be and planning accordingly to help smooth out the last couple of years of the forecast as we're planning forward.
And this includes, again, looking at things like our school bus purchases that we already have mapped out for the next several years of what
Right.
we know we're going to need to spend on replacements
Yes.
for buses, vans, et cetera.
Yeah, and, I think that we'll want to come together probably in a work session in June to really kind of go through and solidify some of those plans of what that will look like. Overall, at 45 million may not be the number. It may end up being a little bit more than that, moving forward. And then we have, in the future years, we can continue to allocate funds based on what those needs are to help smooth out that forecast if we need to. If we have that ebb and flow of state funding, sometimes we might get a little bit more, sometimes we might get a little bit less.
And I think with everyone's schedules, with what we've been looking at, it maybe looking at our next regularly scheduled meeting,
Yes.
just building in some time to dedicate to that, trying to keep the rest of the agenda as light as we can. And
Yeah,
being
it would
able to
be part
focus
of
on
the
that.
June. It would be part of the June regular meeting. Was what I was thinking. Are there any questions about that?
I do have a question before we move on. While we're on the topic of transfers, would this mean that we wouldn't have to get on the ballot sooner? Could you kind of talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I don't think that this overall would affect our timing of being on the ballot because it's, again, just moving where we're paying for things from. So overall, this wouldn't impact the timing of any ballot initiative that we would have. Thanks for that question. That's a good question.
I have another quick question. So the terminations benefits fund, I think that might sound a
Sounds
little
funky, doesn't
sound a
it?
little funky to people that are listening. What exactly does that cover?
Well, thank you for that, because it does sound a little funny. That is what it's actually labeled as in the Auditor State's guidance and in Ohio Revised Code. But that's essentially severance payments. When somebody retires, they are able to be paid a portion of their leave as a severance payment, their sick leave, their accumulated sick leave. And also when somebody separates from employment, terminates their employment, there's a vacation payout for employees who receive that. And that's all under statute. And so this allows us to help plan for some of those future expenses, especially as we're seeing large changes in the retirement system. STRS just recently made another change. They've made a couple of changes over the last couple of years. This will help us sort of help plan for future things like
Thanks.
that. Yeah.
And just on both of these may be rescinded if needed, right?
Yes.
Just pointing that out. So for example, we have a plan for money we put in a capital projects fund, say it's for school buses, right? But then if we get into we're already in a bind, but if there's a particular circumstance, we could say, okay, we're actually going to delay
Right.
those planned school bus purchases and we're going to pull some of that money back.
Right, and the capital projects fund has the caveat that if those plans aren't realized within 10 years, then those monies will go back to the originating fund. But either of these funds, they can be rescinded in whole or in part at any time as plans change or what that looks like. So under current law. So that could obviously change going forward, but that's what's in current law now. I wanted to talk a little bit about austerity measures. So we rescinded the capital projects fund that was combined with that bond issue as we weren't able to move forward with those projects overall. And so we reduced our current year budgets by about 4.8 million, which is cumulative. I want to make sure that that's our new starting point for our budgets going forward. And then we reduced our projected budgets. So curriculum and technology, they have a lot of peaks and valleys with their budgets depending on adoption cycle and all of that. And so with being able to basically defer and delay some purchases, we were able to reduce future budgets by over $2.4 million. We reduced over 30 positions for next school year for a savings of over $3 million. We eliminated our annual transfer out to the permanent improvement funds for turf replacement and said that we could just look at paying for that as needed out of the PI, the permanent improvement funds that we have available as is. We were able to reduce our next year's budget after finalizing all of those numbers going into next year by over $1 million. So that's an additional savings that we hadn't originally anticipated. Did you want anything?
I would just like to thank all of our principals and department leaders for their hard work on that. And really, there are a lot of, I always feel the need to say this, when we talk about reducing any of these things, they're all things that we'd like to have. And so what reductions mean is we're doing without some things that we would like to do or like to have.
Yeah, thank you for that.
sorry, really quickly, for the positions, the 30 positions that have been reduced for next year, the bulk of those are those based on retirements and folks going to other positions.
The vast majority are
the
through
bulk of
attrition.
those.
And that's a great segue into this slide.
Yes, so I did put together a slide to show, so we have 6 different employee groups. So our AAS is our administrative approved staff, so that's all of the support staff that supports our district administration. And then we have admin, which is our administrators. Our OPSI 138 are our cooks, custodians, maintenance workers, those folks. And then our OPSI 719 are our bus drivers, van drivers, and mechanics. And then WEA is all of our teaching staff and all of our certified professional staff that work with students. And then WESA is our educational support staff. So it's our secretaries, our health aides, study hall monitors, and those folks are in our WESA group. And I'm staring at the people in the back, see if I forgot anybody.
I
They
was
have-
just going to point out with admin, we do have one more that is a pending retirement that we anticipate. So we've only captured on here what we actually have. So with a lot of these positions, it's looking at as retirements or resignations come in, looking at do we need to backfill. So we do have one additional and we're not planning to backfill that we don't have yet. And then I also wanted to point out, we've mentioned this before, but OPSI 719 with our drivers, we already have a shortage of drivers. So that is why that job category doesn't show any reductions.
Yeah, yeah, and I do want to point out that we are doing everything that we can through attrition, like Angie said, but we do have a couple of positions that are just being reduced as well, that don't affect our teaching staff.
All right, I'm going to take this slide. So wanted to put together a visual to just kind of show our administration restructuring. We do have some items on the consent agenda tonight related to this. And so this is actually our current structure. We don't have every position on here. We've only put, just to show each of the levels and primarily positions that are being impacted. So obviously superintendent, I'm not leaving because we have to have one by statute, but deputy superintendent then was that next tier. And as you all know, but for the public's benefit, our deputy superintendent, Scott Dorn, did retire. And so we are not backfilling that position. The next tier that we currently have is assistant superintendent, and that's assistant superintendent of teaching and learning and a business manager. So between the two of them, they oversee the academic side of the house and the operational side of the house. And then underneath that, we currently have an executive director of HR who did report up to the deputy superintendent, and they worked collaboratively on all personnel. So the deputy superintendent had a lot of the responsibility out of my office for staffing and personnel, as well as some other items we'll talk about in a minute. The next level is our director level. And so we have a director of state and federal programs and enrollment. That position is currently held by someone who's retiring. We also have we have a director of elementary curriculum and a director of secondary curriculum. So that's currently 2 positions. And then at a coordinator level, we have a coordinator of student enrollment. That person works over at our enrollment center, which is over at the Ohio Health campus on Polaris. And then we have multiple coordinators of special education, but we're going to talk about that as Nicole does her really cool transition. I'll show you what's changing.
So just real quick before we do transition, I do want to make sure it's clear, this is not our total organizational
Correct,
chart.
just-
These are just specific positions that we're looking at
That are impacted.
restructuring.
Thank
in
you.
those.
Other
Yes.
than mine is just to show
Other
the
than yours,
tiers.
that was
Yeah.
just to show the tiers, yeah. Look at that, smooth, right? This is why I love PowerPoint, this right here.
Okay, so just kind of want to walk through these changes. So again, I already talked about the deputy superintendent retired, not replacing. So if you look at that top green box that says Chief Personnel and Policy Officer, we are essentially combining deputy superintendent with the executive director of HR. So the responsibilities that our deputy had in personnel as well as our executive director will be in one position. We're putting that at the same tier as assistant superintendent and business manager, and we are renaming them all for clarification. So we get a lot of confusion. Quite frankly, I'll just share. Carrie Dennis, who's standing back there, is currently has the title of business manager, and nobody really knows what that means because it's just not consistent with some of our other naming. And so at one point, the district used the titles of chief, and so we're kind of going back to that for the three aspects of the district. So formerly, again, the deputy superintendent really oversaw that personnel piece with our executive director. That'll be the chief personnel and policy officer. So Scott Dorn, as deputy, handled all of our policy. As you know, we have lots of policy and administrative guideline changes as the laws continue to change. So he oversaw that. Those responsibilities will go to this position. Those are the biggest pieces that Scott had that'll go to this position are policy, the legal, a lot of the legal pieces, working with our attorneys, that oversight, and then obviously the personnel and staffing. And so you'll see on the agenda tonight that will be Scott Reeves that we're recommending for that position. And then our current assistant superintendent of teaching and learning, that's a spot we've already had. We're just renaming it chief academic officer and recommending Mark Cooper for that position. Carrie will stay in her current role. It's just, again, a renaming, so we have some consistency in our naming of chief operations officer. So that will be the tier there. So we're eliminating the deputy tier, and we're not eliminating the executive director tier, but we are eliminating that specific executive director and combining those two jobs into that one. And then if you move down to the right, with curriculum, you can see we had, again, the director of elementary and a director of secondary curriculum. We've eliminated those two positions and created just one director of curriculum as an austerity measure. That will be Kate Toma. And then if you look over at the director of state and federal programs and enrollment, we are rolling up the coordinator of student enrollment into that as well. So we're looking at, on the agenda tonight, you'll see Ann Baldwin has applied for that position. And so she'll still have an office here as Juliet did, but also will have an office with space over at the enrollment center as Sarah Berger did. So she's taking over those two roles. And then kind of the lone spot out there is one of the austerity measures that we had announced early on was we would be looking at if we had a coordinator of special education leave, that we would be looking to absorb that. And I'll say for all these positions, because this always comes up, are we going to be able to continue to serve kids' needs if we absorb a coordinator of special ed? Because we've been asked that. Yes, we'll make sure we do, but with any of these things, when we have less people doing more work, the service model may look a little bit different. And so we'll continue to work with our team on making sure that we're meeting kids' needs. None of this is being done because it's a preference necessarily, but it is a result of, the reductions that we're looking at on the administrative side. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have on that.
I do just want to mention, these are district administrative positions
Correct.
that are being reduced.
Correct.
We did not add the.
We didn't add that, did we? So I will just mention we are also absorbing one other administrative position, which is so these are all, as Nicole just said, at a district level, and then we have one building level, which is an assistant principal. So we do have Rob Stranges, our principal at Falls Elementary, is retiring. That's on the agenda this evening. We're recommending Amber Case, current assistant there, to move into that principal role, and we are absorbing her assistant. There's some movement around with the assistants, but we're absorbing that FTE of the assistant principal. So with the administrative reductions, the majority are at the district level, but we do have the one building one. So this was just to try to show the restructuring here at our office to give a little better visual. It's kind of hard to follow sometimes on paper without the visual.
Just in terms of communicating this, so it's a real balance, right? Because does every resident of the district really, necessarily care if Carrie Dennis had a title change or so on and so forth? But I think it's important that people know how we're structured overall. So what's the plan to share? This is a significant reduction in administrative positions, and it's a real restructure and absorbing work in different ways. So how are we going to communicate that so that people understand that chart before that shows?
We're open to suggestions on that because we have put something out already. We need to continue to work on that. That's a great question. One thing I neglected to mention here too, I talked about that chief personnel and policy officer picking up a lot of Scott Dorn's responsibility. Carrie and Mark and those other two chief roles are also picking up some pieces of what Scott Dorn did. So I just want to add that as well. I think maybe the visual would be helpful because we've put it out in writing and we didn't do a good job. So obviously it wasn't as clear as we thought it was. So we need
But
to
it's
probably put our
complicated.
heads back together and try to figure out a good way to communicate that. But we're certainly open to suggestions.
Yeah, thanks. It's complicated, right? I mean, the visuals help, but we'll have to keep talking about it, I think.
Yes, for sure. Thank you. Any other questions?
I guess it's more, not more of a question, but really kind of thinking about that piece of how do we continue to educate people about these changes, is just thinking about who maybe we can work with in the district to have conversations, and they can also, you know, answer questions too. So maybe that might be a good way to
Yeah, I
help
mean,
people
I think we
understand.
definitely need to get at it from different directions. So we put the initial communication out. Obviously, wasn't very thorough or understood. So we definitely need to look at some different ways to message it for sure.
Thank you.
I mean, you know this, but I would just suggest too that like parent council is a great vehicle, and those are folks who really actually understand in many cases how the different district is structured because they're, you
They
know,
work with all of
they're
us.
working
Yeah.
with all of you. So I feel like that's a place where it's just really
Yep.
important for people to understand the changes because they're great at helping to communicate when people have questions.
Absolutely agree. Great idea. Okay.
So as we think about expenditures, uncertainty, staffing needs and educational needs of students is always on the list. The economy and inflation, healthcare costs, and legislative mandates. These are all things that we're continually keeping an eye on as we're planning for the future. So I'm gonna have this weird looking graph for a while overall with those transfers. So it looks a little odd, but I do want to point out that we had ESSER funds that covered some of our expenses from 21 all the way through 24. Actually, we have a little bit going into 25 as well, just with the way payrolls run, contract years run versus fiscal years. But so the green line is our projected revenue. The red line is our projected expenses. The blue bar graph represents our unreserved ending general fund balance. Regardless of transfers or if that was not there, those peaks there, you would see that our revenues are not keeping pace with inflation. I did pull down what was the average annual inflationary rate with the CPI for all urban consumers. You know, it's hard because education is such a very niche industry, but just looking at that overall, where the CPI has been, I think it's helpful to see. And then as we think about what that's going to look like moving forward, you know, the cost of a school bus has doubled in price since we were last on the ballot, and those costs just continue to go up. Our technology costs, we know that those prices are just going to continue to go up. We're not sure where we will be with tariffs and what that looks like moving forward. The cost of food, everything has gone up. Our utilities we're expecting to go up next year as we're seeing, you know, rate increases overall as the cost of energy becomes a little bit more expensive. So I think that, you know, at the end of the day, we have a cash balance policy that requires we stay within 90 days of that for that unreserved balance. This forecast doesn't meet that. Some of it is the transfers out. I mean, we wouldn't meet it even if we hadn't transferred the money out, even if we don't transfer the money out, I should say. I think that when we come back in November, we'll be able to smooth out the red line towards the end here with being able to use some of those one-time funds to help be a stopgap in those outer years overall. But at the end of the day, our revenues are not keeping up with inflation. So our opportunities are to go back to our community, ask for more money, lobby the state for more money, which we're trying very hard. The state is not going to come through and make up. We have a $17 million deficit looking into next year. That continues to grow throughout the forecast period. The state will never make that deficit up. And we will continue to see increase in costs unless we make some very severe programmatic cuts overall. And I'm talking like closing buildings, eliminating programs completely, without additional revenues. So.
Ms. Marshall, even if we were to actually have the Fair School funding formula with updated costs, we still, right, would not be able to, we wouldn't be
Right.
able to eliminate that debt.
The need.
yeah.
Yeah. So the cost of education is a shared responsibility. And when we're talking about updating the Fair School funding plan with the appropriate cost inputs and, doing both sides of the calculation and all that, that's getting the state to do its part. But we will always continue to have that local share. And it's always going to be based on what is our community's ability to raise revenue at the local level. So we will have to continue to have that conversation, as most suburban school districts in central Ohio do.
And Ms. Marshall, in regards to the ESSER funds piece, for those who might not know,
Oh.
that's the federal share that we got. Would you
Thank you.
explain
I
that
feel
real quick?
like I've talked about ESSER funds so much over the years that everybody should know what that means by now. So yes, so these are the COVID dollars, one-time COVID dollars that we received over a 3.5-year period to help be a stopgap for revenue losses and needs that we saw during that time frame. We got 3 rounds. I think it was about a little over $32 million in total that we got. And we moved expenses out of the general fund that we normally pay out of the general fund into those ESSER funds until those were exhausted, and all of those expenses have come back to the general fund.
Which looks like we had a huge spike in additional expenses and
Right.
all at one time.
Yeah, so if you look at like 22 to 23, a lot of that was ESSER funds coming back into the general fund, the expenses, the ESSER funds expiring and the expenses coming back overall. And there's the transfers, yeah, in case that wasn't obvious. So I want to talk about, when we talk about what can we ask our community for, there are 2 different types of levies. There's various versions of a property tax levy and a couple of versions of an income tax levy, but really our ability to ask our community for new taxes comes from either property taxes or income taxes. School districts cannot ask for a tax levy on the income of workers, and I want to emphasize workers. So a municipality, when they have an income tax, like, we work in the city of Westerville, we pay Westerville City's taxes. I don't live in the city of Westerville, but I work in the city of Westerville, so I pay the city income tax here. School districts don't have that ability. We don't have the ability to ask our community to tax workers. We can only ask our community to tax themselves, essentially. Or sales tax. That is not an option. Counties have an option for sales tax. School districts do not. So when we talk about property taxes are levied on all real estate located within the district's boundaries that's not exempted. House Bill 920 limits the growth for the opportunities for the growth in revenue on all voted property tax levies. So that's where it's adjusting those rates down as property values increase. Municipalities are able to also limit growth or exempt growth on new construction. So our opportunity for growth with voted levies is that new construction, but with economic development incentives and all those things, sometimes that ability is limited or non-existent. When we look at income taxes are levied on the income of all residents, so anyone residing within the district's boundaries, and so this also includes anyone renting. So even if you don't own your home, it also includes if you reside within the district, you would be subject to the school district income tax. Employers are required to withhold that from your earnings.
I want to underscore the district's boundaries.
The district's
The
boundaries.
school district's boundaries, just that's super clear to everybody.
Yeah, and so if we think about it, if we look at our 52 square miles, the city of Westerville is 12. The city of Westerville has an income tax. We also have Genoa Township, they do not. Blendon Township has an income tax for their Jed Z for people who work in Blendon Township. Minerva Park has an income tax. City of Columbus has an income tax. Plain and Sharon Township, I don't believe, have income taxes. So, but it would be all of those boundaries everywhere. And it is separate from the city income tax. We receive no revenue from the city of Westerville for services or programs or anything like that. So, yeah. There are two different types. There is a traditional school district income tax, and there is a earned income tax for school districts. So it can be based only on earned income. Traditional would look at would be the same sort of income tax that you would see with the state income tax. So on all of the modified adjusted gross income. Earned income only includes actual wages. It does not tax retirement or interest or anything like that. It also allows for growth opportunity with revenues as incomes grow, but it also is subject to the ebb and flow of the economy. So if income goes down, then revenue goes down, as it's based on a percentage of overall income. So something to keep in mind. And if we're curious, what school districts currently have an active income tax? So I will say this is as of fiscal year 24. I'm not aware of anyone that's rescinded a local income tax with the school district, but so this was from a member brief from the Legislative Services Commission that was released in February of this year. So the light blue represents active school districts' income taxes. And so I meant to highlight us, but we are, if I can get this straight, right there. So we straddle Franklin and Delaware counties right there. And we're like right smack dab in the middle of the state, aren't we? But that's us there. So you can see everyone that's around us that has an active school district income tax.
And do we know if those are the traditional income tax or the earned?
I don't have anything that distinguishes that for this, but there is a list on the Department of Taxation's website that shows what schools have earned versus traditional.
Thank you.
And the process for the district to gain income tax looks very much like a levy. It goes in front of the voters to be voted on, correct?
Yeah, so it would be, we would have some resolutions that we would be required to file with the state tax commissioner versus a property tax levy we would file with the county auditor. But the state tax commissioner would have to certify amounts based on whatever percentage that would look like. And so, and we can talk more about numbers when we have a work session to kind of just look at some things. If the board is interested in having that conversation. I think it's important for us to weigh out all of our options when we think about the conversation around housing and, we continue to hear that we have retirees who are being taxed out of their homes. And I think that this would help with that conversation if we wanted to take a look at that, if we went the earned income route and not the traditional income taxes. So just something to think about as we're having that conversation. And, there's lots of conversations about property taxes going on right now overall and what that looks like. It would help us diversify our revenue resources a little bit and maybe help with some stability moving forward. And I do want to make it clear that if we were to have an income tax, we would be talking about looking at what our current operational needs are. We're not talking about eliminating the property taxes that we have and introducing an income tax, right? This would be in addition to, as we still needed another property tax levy, which is why we were on in November. So,
Right.
That's it. Perfect time for questions.
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you. Thanks for putting that together. I know that in order to be on the ballot, we're kind of bumping up to a time frame. Can you kind of walk us through when we need to be providing that information to the state?
Yeah, so so the deadline for the income tax would be July the 25th, I believe, but it has the same filing deadline as anything else to be on the ballot, which would be August 6th if you wanted to be on by the November ballot issue. We have the property taxes. We would have a resolution of necessity that we would have to get to the county auditor with enough time for them to certify it, then come back with a resolution to proceed, and then all that gets filed with the County Board of Elections. So all that also needs to be filed by August the 6th. So we would be looking at legislation in probably the second meeting of June, first, and the only meeting in July that we have scheduled now, if that's something that we wanted to consider for the fall, to move forward. And I do want to mention just real quick with property taxes, they're very specific about the tax year, collection year, right? So if we passed in 25, that would be for tax year 25, collection year 26. We'd see a half year collections in fiscal year 26, full year beginning in fiscal year 27. Income taxes are a little bit different. Takes a little bit of time for those to get set up, as all of the employers have to begin assessing that school district income tax. So the how soon we would see revenues from that would be lagging a little bit based on the cycle of when income taxes are paid and what that looks like and gets back to us. I think we wouldn't see that the full collections or that smoothed out until 27, 28 timeframe as it's getting caught up.
And just because not everybody is paying minute by minute attention
Right.
to when the state's budget is expected, can you talk through the timing of that? Because
Yeah,
I know we
it's super
delay,
convenient, isn't
right?
it?
Yeah.
So the state has to have a budget approved by June 30th in order to operate on July 1st. So when we're talking about, if we're looking at legislation at the end of June, just a reminder, we did the same thing with May, right? If we have to pivot or what that looks like might be a little bit difficult to do with that time crunch with the state's budget.
And I just want to, again, underscore your previous point that it is expected to be a shared responsibility. So there is no magical thinking here that the state is going to come back with a budget where we don't have to, ask the local community for more dollars very soon.
Right, yeah,
Right?
there
It's
is,
just a question of
there
size.
is no state budget that will come through that will meet the shortfall in revenue that we have.
Yeah.
It's just not, it's not possible because there's always that shared responsibility.
But what we would like to do is make sure that we're asking for as reasonable of an amount as we can. So we want to see what the state comes in with, and then we have a gap to fill with the local
Absolutely.
community. So, thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Marshall, I wanted to thank you for playing that clip with Dave Thomas and him explaining or recommending that we do these transfers. I guess this conversation about not having 5-year forecasts and, telling districts to put out, forecasts with just 2 or 3 years. Could you kind of talk a little bit more about the importance, at least for our district, in having a 5-year forecast?
Yeah, so, I will be the first to say fiscal years 28 and 29, as far as revenues are concerned, you can see that we're projecting that green line, right? We're projecting flat and even somewhat declining revenues over the forecast period. I don't know what the state's budget's gonna look like every other year, right? Like every 2 years we go through this down at the State House, beg them not to cut our funding or this is the first time I feel like we actually have a funding formula that people worked on, and we all generally agree that if it were appropriately updated and fully funded, would meet the state's responsibility to provide a thorough and efficient system of schools under the Constitution. Don't know if we'll get there, but I do think when we're talking about our ability to sign that 412 certificate, also our planning as we're looking forward. Just an example we use of our copier lease. We have 5-year copier leases, and entering into a 3-year lease agreement versus a 5-year agreement is a difference of 6 figures over that term of the lease. So I think that if the state says we don't have to do a 5-year forecast anymore, we're still going to continue to do a 5-year forecast. We'll just submit 3 years to the state. I think that whole conversation is, again, everyone not really understanding how schools function and all of the inner workings that we have with certifications and contracts and various things like that. Thank you for that question. All right, I swear I was done. Was that any other questions?
Looks like, no.
Well, we'll just keep watching, keeping an eye on what we're looking at. And I do think if we could have a conversation, do a short work session in June, and we can take a look at what we might think about for the future.
Yeah, I think we'll need that.
Thank you.